What is English language? The residents of early medieval England are credited as being the first people to speak English, which belongs to the West Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family. It was named after the Angles, an ancient Germanic people who migrated from Anglia, a peninsula on the Baltic Sea, not to be confused with East Anglia in England, to the region of Great Britain that was later named after them, England. The Angles settled in what is now known as East Anglia in England. Scots, followed by Low Saxon and Frisian, is the language that comes next in line as one of English's most closely related living cousins. The vocabulary of Old Norse, Old Norman French, and Latin, in addition to West Germanic, has had a significant impact on English, despite the fact that English is descended from West Germanic languages, a North Germanic language. Anglophones are people who are fluent in the English language. Old English is the collective name for the earliest forms of English, which evolved from a group of West Germanic, Yngvionic, dialects brought to Great Britain by Anglo-Saxon settlers in the 5th century and further mutated by Norse-speaking Viking settlers, beginning in the 8th and 9th centuries. These West Germanic, Yngvionic dialects were brought to Great Britain by Anglo-Saxon settlers in the 5th century. Following the Norman invasion of England in the late 11th century, a significant amount of French, particularly Old Norman, and Latinate vocabulary was integrated into English over the course of around 300 years. This resulted in the development of Middle English. The late 15th century saw the arrival of the printing press in London, the beginning of the printing of the King James Bible, and the beginning of the Great Vowel Shift. All of these events marked the beginning of early modern English. Since the 17th century, the global impact of the British Empire and the United States of America has resulted in the modern English language being widely used in a variety of countries across the globe. The English language has emerged as the preeminent language of international conversation and the lingua franca in many areas and professional settings, including the fields of science, navigation, and law, thanks to all forms of written and electronic media that these nations produce. The modern grammar of English is the result of a gradual shift away from the typical Indo-European dependent marking pattern, which featured a rich inflectional morphology and relatively free word order, and toward a predominantly analytic pattern, which featured very little inflection and a word order that was fairly fixed between subject, verb, and object. The representation of complicated tenses, aspects, and moods in modern English is achieved primarily via the use of auxiliary verbs and word order. Passive constructions, interrogatives, and various forms of negation are also possible using this method. If Chinese is broken down into its many dialects, then English is the most spoken language in the world. However, among native speakers, it is the third most spoken language in the world, after Standard Chinese and Spanish. It is the second language that is studied by the most people and is recognized as either the only official language or one of the official languages in 59 different countries. There are now more persons who can communicate well in English thanks to their knowledge of the language as a second language than there are native speakers. According to estimates made in 2005, there were more than 2 billion people who spoke English as their native language. The native language of the majority of people in the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, see Anglosphere, as well as the Republic of Ireland, is English. Additionally, English is widely spoken in a number of regions throughout the Caribbean, Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. It is recognized as a working language by a large number of international organizations on a global and regional scale, including the United Nations and the European Union. It is the Germanic language that is spoken by the most people, accounting for at least 70% of the speakers of this branch of the Indo-European language family. In terms of phonetics and phonology, as well as occasionally also vocabulary, idioms, grammar, and spelling, there is a great deal of variability among the many accents and dialects of English used in different countries and regions. However, this variability does not typically prevent speakers of other dialects and accents from understanding one another, although instances of mutual unintelligibility can occur at the extreme ends of the dialect continuum. The evolution of the English language. Old English, sometimes known as Anglo-Saxon, is the name given to the version of English that existed between the years 550 and 1066. Old English was initially spoken along the coasts of Frisia, Lower Saxony, and southern Jutland by Germanic peoples who are known to the historical record as the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. These dialects are often grouped together as Anglo-Frisian or North Sea Germanic. Old English developed from these dialects. Anglo-Saxons began to colonize Britain about the 5th century, coinciding with the fall of the Roman economy and governance. Common Brittonic, a Celtic language, and Latin, which were introduced to Britain by the Roman occupation, were replaced by the Germanic language of the Anglo-Saxons as the main language in Britain by the 7th century. This meant that the languages of Roman Britain, 43 to 409, were no longer spoken. The Angles provided the inspiration for the names England and English, which were formerly Angland and Anglisk. Old English may be broken down into 4 different dialects: the Anglian dialects, Mercian and Northumbrian, the Saxon dialects, Kentish and West Saxon, and the Middle English dialect. As a result of the educational reforms instituted by King Alfred in the 9th century and the influence of the Kingdom of Wessex, the West Saxon dialect emerged as the variant of written English that was considered to be the standard. Beowulf, an ancient epic poem, is written in West Saxon, whereas Caedmon's hymn, considered to be the first poetry written in English, is written in Northumbrian. Mercian was the primary contributor to the development of modern English, whereas Northumbrian was the primary contributor to the development of the Scots language. A few brief inscriptions dating back to the beginning of the time period covered by Old English were written using a runic script. By the 6th century, a Latin alphabet was in use, and it was written using letter forms that were half uncial. It included the modified Latin characters, as well as the runic letters Win and Thorn. Old English is effectively a separate language from modern English, and it is very unlikely that unstudied English speakers living in the 21st century will be able to comprehend Old English. Its grammar was comparable to that of current German, and Old Frisian is the language that is most closely related to it. There were a lot more inflectional endings and forms for nouns, adjectives, pronouns, and verbs, and the arrangement of words was a lot more flexible than it is in modern English. Old English featured case ends in nouns as well as in verbs, and verbs had a greater variety of person and number endings than they do in modern English. Modern English includes case forms in pronouns, he, his, and it has a few verb inflections: speak, talks, speaking, spoke, spoken. Distribution in terms of geography. As of the year 2016, there were 400 million individuals who spoke English as their first language, and there were 1.1 billion people who spoke English as a secondary language. According to the amount of people who can speak it, English is the most common language. Communities on every continent as well as islands scattered across all of the world's seas use English as their primary language. There are several classifications that might be applied to the nations where English is spoken on the basis of the ways in which the language is used in each nation. The nations that make up the so-called inner circle, each of which has a large number of native speakers of English, have developed a common worldwide standard of written English and work together to influence speech standards for English all over the globe. The English language does not belong exclusively to any one nation, nor does it belong only to those descended from English colonists. Countries with relatively few descendants of people who originally spoke English as their first language often choose to make English an official language. When individuals who do not speak the same native language meet any place in the globe, it has also become the language that is used for international communication since it is by far the most essential. There are 3 concentric rings of nations that speak English. Using a model consisting of 3 rings, the Indian linguist Braj Kachru differentiated between the countries where English is spoken. According to his model, the inner circle countries have large communities of native speakers of English. The outer circle countries have smaller communities of native speakers of English but widespread use of English as a second language in education, or broadcasting, or for local official purposes. And the expanding circle countries are countries where a large number of people learn English as a foreign language. Kachru established the foundation for his approach by researching the history of how the English language expanded to other nations, how people learn English, and the many ways English is used in each region. Over time, members come and go from each of the 3 rings. Countries such as Britain, the United States of America, Australia, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand where the majority of the population speaks English, and South Africa, where a significant minority of the population speaks English, are examples of countries with large communities of native speakers of English, the inner circle. In descending order, the countries with the most native English speakers are the United States, with at least 231 million, the United Kingdom, with 60 million, Canada, 19 million, Australia, with at least 17 million, South Africa, 4.8 million, Ireland, 4.2 million, and New Zealand. The United States of America has the most native English speakers, 3.7 million. In these nations, children of native speakers learn English through their parents, as well as local individuals who speak other languages and new immigrants who learn English to converse in their neighborhoods and places of employment. The nations that make up the inner circle are the foundation upon which the English language is built and then exported to the rest of the globe. The number of people who speak English as a second language or a foreign language is estimated to be anywhere from 470 million to more than 1 billion. However, this figure is very variable depending on how competency is defined. According to the estimations of linguist David Crystal, there are currently 3 times as many non-native speakers as there are native speakers. In Cottrew's model, consisting of 3 circles, the outer circle countries are countries such as the Philippines, Jamaica, India, Pakistan, Singapore, Malaysia, and Nigeria. These countries have a much lower proportion of native speakers of English, but a significant amount of use of English as a second language for education, government, or domestic business, as well as its routine use for school instruction and official interactions with the government. Cottrew's model consists of 3 circles. These nations are home to millions of people who are fluent in dialect continuums ranging from English-based Creole to a more conventional form of the English language. They have a far larger number of people who are able to speak English as a result of having grown up using English on a day-to-day basis and listening to English-speaking broadcasts, particularly if they attended schools that taught in English as the primary language of instruction. There is a possibility that non-native speakers of English who were born to English-speaking parents would acquire a variant of English that is impacted, particularly in its grammar, by the other languages that those learners are fluent in. The majority of those variations of English include vocabulary that are seldom used by native speakers of English in the nations that make up the inner circle. Additionally, it's possible for them to demonstrate grammatical and phonological deviations from the varieties spoken in the inner circle. The standard English used in the nations that make up the inner circle is sometimes used as a benchmark for determining how English should be used in the countries that make up the outer circle. Within the framework of the 3 circles paradigm, the growing circle is comprised of nations such as Poland, China, Brazil, Germany, Japan, Indonesia, and Egypt, along with other nations in which English is taught as a foreign language. The differences between English as a first language, as a second language, and as a foreign language are often up for debate, and they may shift over time in certain nations or over the course of certain historical periods. For instance, in the Netherlands and a few other European countries, knowledge of English as a second language is nearly universal, with over 80% of the population able to use it. Because of this, English is frequently used to communicate with people from other countries and is frequently used in higher education. The extensive usage of English in these nations puts them on the cusp of transitioning from the outer circle to the growing circle, despite the fact that English is not the official language of their governments. When compared to other languages spoken throughout the globe, English is unique in that a significant number of its users are not native English speakers, but rather speakers of English as a second or foreign language. The majority of persons who use English in the expanding circle do so in order to communicate with those who are also part of the expanding circle. Hence, their interactions with people who were born speaking English do not factor into their choice to use the language. Because of the widespread usage of non-native variants of English for international communication, speakers of one non-native variety often come into contact with aspects of other non-native varieties. In today's world, it is not uncommon for there to be no native English speakers present at all in a discussion that is taking place in English anywhere in the globe, even when there are participants from many nations. This is especially true with regard to the terminology that is common to both mathematics and the sciences. English with a plural focus. Because English is a pluricentric language, there is no one national authority that can be pointed to as the norm for how the language should be used. The national pronunciation standards for spoken English, such as the English used in broadcasting, are often created by tradition rather than legislation. This is the case even though spoken English usually adheres to these standards. However, newsreader scripts are also created in a major part in worldwide standard written English. This allows listeners to identify foreign broadcasters as being from a certain country as opposed to another based only on their accents. The rules of standard written English are maintained only by the agreement of educated English speakers located all over the globe. There is no monitoring provided by any government or international organization in this process. Listeners in the United States typically have little trouble understanding the vast majority of British broadcasting, while listeners in the United Kingdom typically have no trouble understanding the majority of American programming. The vast majority of people who speak English across the globe are able to comprehend radio broadcasts, television shows, and movies that originate from many different sections of the English-speaking world. Both standard and non-standard variations of English are capable of using formal and informal styles, which may be differentiated from one another by word choice and grammar, as well as technical and non-technical registers. South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand have produced Koineized forms of English as a result of their colonization histories, which helped level dialect differences and produced Koineized forms of English. These nations are part of the English-speaking inner circle. After arriving in the United States, the majority of immigrants who did not have British heritage picked up the language of their new home rather quickly. There has never been a language designated as the official language of the United States federal government. However, the majority of the population in the United States is now monolingual in English, and English has been given official or co-official status by 30 of the 50 state governments, as well as all 5 territorial governments of the United States. English as a global language. It is no longer accurate to refer to English as the language of the English, since its use is no longer exclusive to persons of English ancestry. Both domestically and for purposes of international communication, the use of English is increasing all throughout the world. The majority of individuals study English for purely pragmatic reasons rather than ideological ones. Many people who speak English in Africa are now a member of what is known as the Afro-Saxon linguistic community, which brings together people of various African nations. As decolonization took place throughout the British Empire in the 1950s and 1960s, many of the former colonies did not turn their backs on the English language and instead continued to use it, after becoming independent nations with the ability to choose their own language laws. For instance, the perspective that many people in India have towards the English language has shifted from identifying it with colonialism to associated it with economic success, despite the fact that English is still recognized as one of India's official languages. The number of books written in English that are released each year in India is the 3rd most in the world, behind only the United States and the United Kingdom. English is used extensively in both the media and literature. However, there are just a few 100,000 individuals in India who speak English as a first language, and fewer than 5% of the country's residents are proficient in the language. David Crystal stated in 2004 that India now has more people who speak or understand English than any other country in the world when combining native and non-native speakers. However, the number of English speakers in India is very uncertain, with the majority of scholars coming to the conclusion that the United States still has more speakers of English than India. In addition to being considered the first language of the world, contemporary English is also often referred to be the world's first lingua franca. Newspaper publishing, book publishing, international telecommunications, scientific publishing, international commerce, mass entertainment, and diplomatic relations are some of the areas in which English is the most frequently used language in the world. English is the foundation for the needed regulated natural languages Sea-Speak and Air-Speak, which are used as international languages of seafaring and aviation respectively. This base is mandated by an international treaty. Formerly on equal footing with German and French in the realm of scientific research, English is now the language of choice in this sector. During the discussions for the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, it reached linguistic parity with French as a language used in diplomacy. At the conclusion of World War II, when the United Nations was established, English had already attained its position as the preeminent language, and it continues to serve as the primary language used in diplomacy and international affairs today. It is recognized by the United Nations as one of its 6 official languages. English is designated as the working language or official language of a great number of different international organizations across the globe, one of which is the International Olympic Committee. Even though the majority of their member nations do not have a population that is composed of native English speakers, many regional international organizations, such as the European Free Trade Association, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations (ASEAN), and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC), have established English as their organization's only official working language. Although the European Union (EU) allows its member states to designate any of the national languages as an official language of the Union, the primary working language of EU organizations is English. This is despite the fact that the EU allows member states to designate any of the national languages as an official language of the Union. Although English is not an official language in the majority of nations, it is now the language that is taught as a second language more often than any other. In the nations that make up the European Union, 19 of the 25 member states in which English is not an official language, nonetheless rank it as the most frequently spoken language in a foreign country, that is, the countries other than Ireland and Malta. In a survey that was carried out by the official Eurobarometer in 2012, back when the UK was still a member of the EU, it was found that 38% of EU respondents from countries other than those in which English is an official language reported that they were able to speak English well enough to carry on a conversation in that language. The second most often stated foreign language is French, which is also the foreign language that has the greatest level of familiarity in the United Kingdom and Ireland. 12% of respondents are able to speak French in conversation. It is increasingly necessary to demonstrate proficiency in English in order to work in a variety of fields and professions, including medical and computer programming, for example. More than 80% of all articles published in scientific journals that were indexed by Chemical Abstracts in 1998 were written in English. By 1996, 90% of all articles published in natural science publications were written in English, and by 1995, 82% of all articles published in humanities publications were written in English. This demonstrates how important English has become in the publishing of scientific research. It is possible for those involved in international commerce or other international communities to use English as a secondary language, putting more of a focus on terminology that is appropriate for the field in which they are interested. As a result of this, a number of academics have begun developing the study of English as an additional language. Globish is a trademarked form of English that utilizes the regular English grammar in conjunction with a very limited subset of the English vocabulary, about 1,500 terms, aimed to reflect the greatest usage in international business English. A further illustration is provided by Simple English. The expanding usage of the English language around the globe has had an influence on other languages, which has led to the assimilation of certain English terms into the vocabularies of other languages. This influence of English has led to concerns about the death of languages, as well as claims of linguistic imperialism, and it has provoked resistance to the spread of English. However, the number of speakers of English continues to increase, because many people all over the world believe that English provides them with opportunities for better employment and improved lives. The majority of linguists believe that it is more likely than not that English will continue to function as a Koineized language, in which speakers from all over the world speak a standard form that is mutually intelligible to one another. This is despite the fact that some academics, who mention the possibility of future divergence of English dialects into languages that cannot be understood by one another. The majority of people in most nations throughout the globe communicate with one another using English as their primary language. Therefore, English's usage around the globe has increased far more than that of any other artificial language, including Esperanto, which has been advocated as an international auxiliary language. Phonology of English language. The phonetics and phonology of the English language change from one dialect to another, yet this often does not hinder the ability of speakers of different dialects to communicate with one another. Phonological variation alters the inventory of phonemes, which are the speech sounds that are used to differentiate between meanings, while phonetic variation refers to the many ways in which phonemes may be spoken. This overview focuses mostly on describing the conventional pronunciations used in the United Kingdom, Received Pronunciation, or RP, and the United States, General American Pronunciation, or GA. For a more in-depth look at variations, accents, and dialects, go below.